I want to talk about story today because in the last couple of years, story has become a popular term as it relates to marketing. Now, I love the concept of story. I have several books in my library on story. One of them, which I love, is called Story Brand, Building a Story Brand. That's a great podcast also, Donald Miller, Building a Story Brand. There is Joseph Murphy, where he talks about the hero's journey. There's story in that. There's a book I bought called Story Wars. There's a lot of story going around, and it's cool. But, and here's where people get stuck, right? We start to think of this happens all the time in any kind of marketing where we're teaching marketing. People, they start to listen to the advice or the lesson that the person is teaching about story, and then we start to try to figure out, like, well, what story am I supposed to tell? Or my story isn't as good as your story, or there are too many stories to tell. I don't know which one to pick. So we start to focus in on the thing that's being taught rather than the truth that's already in us. Do you see? Let me say it again, right? We start to, this happens not just with story, anything that we go learn at a conference, in a book, from a coach. We learn something, a distinction of some sort, and then we look at it like this thing. We're like, this is story. What is my story? How do I tell a story? And so we get confused by the thing that we're learning about rather than accessing the truth that's inside. Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. I've already given you some of the problems that happen right here. We get paralysis because we're overwhelmed by what story? How do I tell the story? I don't like the story I wrote, or any of that. I don't know how my story relates to my product. But also comparison, right? Because we start to compare our story to somebody else's story. I didn't tell the story right. So these are all the downfalls of what we do with story. It's not the fault of story itself. Story is just an inanimate concept, but we as humans get all up in our head about it. So how do we actually harness story in such a way that it would make a difference for those who consume our content, right? Okay, well, here's the principle. The principle is that your life is your story. That is the story. You're like, but Chris, I don't have a good story. I remember this back in my Christian days, right? People would be like, everybody would be envious of everybody else's like personal testimony. Like if you were like, had the hardest background and the worst upbringing, like everybody is jealous of your personal testimony because you had like, oh, it's a really good story. I don't have that. My story's boring. But we do this in life as humans. We compare ourselves to others. But here's the thing, like, this is it. You have to go look at your story, your life, because life has taught you something. You have the convictions you have because of the life you've lived. So, what else are you going to bring to us? What else could you possibly market that would inspire our souls and have us relate to you like you're real, like you're the real deal? You can't tell somebody else's story. You can only tell your story. So, the principle is your story, your life is your story. That's the story to tell. Now, in that, here's the next piece of this principle is you have to start to mine, M-I-N-E, mine your story for truth. You have to start to look for, what has my life taught me that I now believe to be true? What have I learned that I could pass on to others? What failures have I had that I could share with others so they don't have to have the same failures? What successes have I had, and what did I do to get those successes, and how can I pass that on so others could have those successes? Like, all you need to tell your story is to just look at your own life and start to feel into the truths that you've learned. Story isn't so much about something out here I'm going to conjure up or invent or have to take a creative workshop for to figure out how to say something to you in marketing. Your story comes from your own life. And it's your job to go mine your life for the truth that life has taught you. That, gang, is at the heart of all marketing. All marketing that's authentic anyway. So if you want to tell a more authentic story, if you want to have a more authentic message in your marketing, look no further than your